I'm Ryan,
I'm Oscar.
and this is the Sound Project.
I want to let you know we have some awesome recording studio tours coming up, so make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on these amazing videos.
All right, so part of our process is we always ask our clients for inspiration shots and that goes into our 3D photorealistic renderings. And we always tell people like those inspiration shots can be, anything. Like some people have sent us restaurants, family rooms, like it could be other studios. But what I want to talk about today is how you take those inspiration shots and how, like, what your thought process is from, all right, these are the things that are in the client's head, like then how do you get to something that is unique to that client?
Yeah, so it's a pretty fun process, and we're kind of one of our big design philosophies, I suppose, is that we try and make every room as unique as possible.
Right.
And not even just, unique for the sake of being unique, but just because every client is unique and their goals of what they want the room to look and sound like are going to be just as unique as every other client of ours.
Sure.
And so getting those inspiration images and talking about what their vision is and honing in on that is a big part of our process.
Mm-hmm. So with the renderings, like they've honestly changed a lot, and that's like mostly been because of the way that you've been doing the renderings. But do you want to talk about how the renderings started with Heuristic Designs and then like what the process is like now?
Yeah, so we started doing the renderings for our client Tori Kelly, and where that was back when I was an intern. We talked about this in an episode that where you interviewed me a bit before.
Yeah.
But it started just because Tori she was picking between a few different design options for her space, and she really was having trouble visualizing it.
Right.
And so we decided it'd be helpful to show it to her in an actual 3D model. And so at the time, we were using a free version of SketchUp and a free plugin, a free rendering engine that is available online for it.
Yeah.
And the renderings would take, 10 plus hours at least. And depending on how complicated the room was, how many renderings you want to do, it would get pretty lengthy. And so it's come a long way since then where we're using a program called Inkscape that is it's a rendering engine that's compatible with SketchUp and a few different 3D modeling softwares.
Okay.
And it allows you to do a lot more rendering in real time. So it can help you make changes and really iterate on the design easily and quickly. And so we're able to kind of go through iterations of different design elements pretty fast now.
Yeah.
And where we can kind of, anything that we're visualizing, it's pretty doable to execute.
The other thing that's really cool is, I don't know if you guys could do it with the older software, but at least with Inkscape, like there was one room that is actually even in your examples, but that you did like an actual walkthrough. So it's like if we have a VR headset, someone can actually walk through their studio now before it's even built, which is super cool.
Yeah, which we've been doing a lot on projects lately, where kind of showing video walkthroughs of it, of kind of like what it looks as you're panning around the room or as you're walking around the room.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just helps give a sense of space. And for that project in particular, they used it for a marketing material for crowdfunding, for funding the project.
Yep.
And so it helps kind of communicate the design to everybody on the team, even the people from their team that we're not talking with all the time.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I know that you prepped a couple of examples, so let's go ahead and go through those.
Yeah. So I know for this, we really want to talk about kind of from inspiration to rendering. So people giving us their inspiration and then us processing that into renderings. And then also a big part of the process is once we do that first batch of renderings, iterating on it. Because a lot of times what we tell clients is like our first iteration is us digesting their inspiration shots and putting something out, but we're aware that might not be what the final, goal is going to be, or what it ends up, what we end up, the direction we end up going in. And that's totally fine. That's a good thing to, iterate on the design and potentially go in a new direction, or, change things where we need to. We don't have a lot of ego with that. We're just trying to execute their vision. And so if they want to change it, we're happy to do that. You know? But so starting off, I thought it'd be good to look at Grand Rapids first.
Yeah.
It's one of our favorite projects. It's for a church up in Grand Rapids called Grand Rapids First, and where they're building a recording studio. Yeah. And it's one of our favorite projects for a number of reasons. Yeah. Where one of the big ones is that they're doing the studio in honor of one of their worship ministers who passed away
Yeah.
from cancer, I believe, a few years ago. And she was this amazing worship leader, and one of her goals and one of her, things that she wanted to do with life was inspire the next generation of worship leaders and of musicians to be able to lead worship.
Yeah.
And so they started this Studio 33.3 in honor of her. And so it's been a really special project for us to be a part of, because we know how much it means to their community and how much it's come to mean to us as well.
For sure.
But so it's this really special project where it's, changing up a few different rooms in their current church space and turning it into a pretty grand 4 room recording studio with a lounge. And then this image is actually a rendering from the lounge,
right?
Where that's kind of where they're going to be hanging out, but that mattered to them as well. So that was part of our rendering process too.
Sure.
But so looking at their space, their initial renderings, they gave us a really strong set of inspiration images.
Okay.
Where they gave us all of these photos individually, but then they kind of created this collage, and where it really, you can kind of sense of, there's like a unified kind of style going on here. You know, it's very bright, very kind of airy, light. And so it was really, really helpful. We kind of look at the way that this project has gone. It's not even finished yet. It's getting constructed right now. We kind of look at it a lot of as kind of like the archetype of how, how we want the design process to go, where they gave us a really strong set of inspiration images. It was very clear what their vision was, and we were able to kind of go from there.
Sure.
And so some particularities for this one, they wanted it to be grand. They wanted to have kind of like this larger than life feeling, like that feeling of when you're going into a church, kind of like, stepping into like a cathedral, something like larger than life. They wanted to have that sense of it. They wanted it to be warm. And so a lot of their studios had kind of like these like natural wood tones and aesthetics to it.
Sure.
They wanted it to feel warm and comfortable. They also wanted it to be light, where they really wanted it to be bright and have like a sense of natural light and a sense of like comfort and airiness to it. And so all of that sounded great to us. We were really excited about it as well. And so this was our first batch of renderings. Or no, just kidding. Clean and Professional was the other one, where they wanted it to be very sleek, easy to work with, and feel very sleek and professional. This was our first batch of renderings, where this was their control room. Kind of like we said, it was this was, the studio was done in honor of their worship leader who had passed away, and she had a tattoo of an ellipses on her arm. Yeah. And so we tried to include that as a part of the design a lot. It was including 3 circles, where we had like these 3 circular light fixtures on the top. And then we incorporated it later on in the design as well. Sure. But so they really liked like this like kind of white studio look with kind of like the uplighting on the side lights, or on the side, on the wall treatment. And then this was the look for the live room, where it was kind of like this big cathedral ceiling, these great tall ceilings, with these, we introduced like these wood elements, these wood kind of curved diffusers on the ceiling. Sure. And they liked these renderings, but they had like, a few notes of how to change it, and where they liked the wood tones, but they were like, we really think we want to stick with like the white, kind of very light feeling. And so this is what that look became, where it was kind of a similar idea, but then a lot whiter, a lot lighter. We added some backlit LED lighting on lots of the panels, and changed the color scheme to be a bit lighter. Sure. And then eventually it became this, where they were saying like, we added some elements like this, station for keyboards and synthesizers on the side. We introduced Dolby Atmos into the space as well. We introduced more lighting around the walls, where you can see like the ellipses theme kind of carries forward, where lots of their lights are in groups of 3. And then this is what the live room ended up looking like, where we simplified a lot of kind of the design approach, where they wanted it to be a bit more sleek, more kind of streamlined. And we simplified it a little bit. Yeah. But so it's just a fun process of iterating on designs and kind of like honing in on what a client wants, where I wouldn't say our, initial round was bad. It was just different from what they wanted, know, and then it was, they saw it, and then it sparked some ideas of what they wanted to change. And then we were able to move forward from that.
This is one that, so I've seen like the finalized renderings and things, and I talk about it pretty frequently, especially like in my church projects. But I had never seen the original rendering. So it's like really crazy that like I've just been working with this image in my head. And so like seeing where it originated from and seeing the like inspiration shots that they initially sent, it's kind of cool to see like, all right, yeah, I can totally see where those inspiration shots are worked into their studio, but this studio doesn't look anything like any of those studios either. So
right, it becomes its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I want to call out is in the control room. So like the SSL duality was like in there throughout the whole process. So like, is that the console that they're getting, and like, are you intentionally putting the gear that you know they're getting into the room?
Yeah, that's the console that they're gonna have. So we're able to kind of create those the actual gear that they're gonna have and show what it's gonna feel like and what it's gonna look like in there.
Nice.
And then those are the speakers that they're gonna have in there as well from Genelec, as well as that's even the custom desk that their producer desk that they're gonna have in the back of the space, where it's gonna be housing some outboard gear.
Sure.
But it's gonna be a customized desk.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and let you move on to the next one.
Yeah. And then also, looking back, these are a few of the iterations that we went through.
Yeah.
But they weren't all of them. Where there were,
Right.
there were probably, total, 9 or 10 different, iterations of. Lots of it was tweaking small things, sure. Tweaking lighting schemes of, let's add a, down lighting here, let's remove down lighting here. But it goes through a lot of iterations, which is a fun part of the process.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The next one's another one of our favorites. It's Tim Henson.
Yep.
It's always an exciting one just because, Tim's such a cool artist, such a great artist. The work he does with Polyphia is pretty amazing. It's a studio we did in Prosper, Texas, in his home studio, and it was a spare bedroom that he had that he was turning into a control room and a small isolation booth.
Right.
This one's one of our favorites because the inspiration images he gave us wasn't images. It was one image. It was just a picture of this living room that he really, really liked. And he said he kind of like, it serves as his inspiration for like his house and just for like the vibe he's going for in his home, that he really wanted to emulate it for the studio. And so it's one of those where not every project's the same, where some clients are kind of like Grand Rapids First, or most clients are sending us, a huge Pinterest board of, here's 100 studios I like, and here's what I like, here's what I don't like, here's what I do like. He kind of had like a very solid, image of vision of what he wanted in his space, and that's enough for us to work from as well.
Yeah.
And this one, it always makes me think of the Office episode when Dwight's teaching Ryan he's teaching him his sales techniques, and he says, Michael always says, keep it simple, stupid. Hurts my feelings every time.
Yes.
But we, it's one of those where you really don't need to, if the client has a particular vision in mind, if they know what they want, you can kind of just design around that, and you can game plan that, and we can show, instill confidence by showing, by showing them their vision, by showing them it executed.
And that's one that like I talk about Tim's all the time on my calls, just because of the fact that it's like when people ask about, what do people send for like the inspiration shots, and it's like, well, Tim literally sent us a single picture of a living room and we got there. So and same deal with like, I don't think Chrissy's a part of this presentation, but like for her inspiration shot, she sent a bunch of restaurants just because that's what she liked the vibe of.
Right.
So
yeah. And so we're always getting, we're getting any kind of architectural. I've had somebody sent us the Colosseum once.
Yeah.
That was their inspiration.
There you go.
And so it's just things that inspire them, of things that we're going to be, pulling design elements from.
Right. For sure.
Yeah. But so this was the first round of inspiration of renderings for it.
Nice.
Where it was kind of like that stark white and black. And then it only took really one round of iterations where we decided to add in that slat wall that they had been talking about. And so again, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
His inspiration image had a slat wall. He really appreciated it, and so we're like, let's include something like that in it.
Yeah.
And so, and obviously, we show them how to take that concept and put it into acoustical, something that will work acoustically in a recording studio space. And so, we added, a ceiling cloud to deal with, some axial room modes from floor to ceiling, a base trap around the horizontal soffit of the room, base trapping in the corners of the space. The slat wall is, has 6 inches of insulation behind it. Right. And so we make sure we add the details that are going to matter acoustically.
Sure.
But this was always a cool space of, keep it simple.
Yeah. And that's something too, like, as you're talking about, we're thinking of it acoustically while you're also thinking aesthetically. And it kind of just takes the interior design to a next level, because it's not just the design. You're also having to think, okay, if I'm doing this design, like, how am I going to incorporate treatment into this then too?
Yeah, exactly. And always just, letting a lot of what we have is, we tell clients kind of like the building blocks that they have of, like, you need base trapping, you need, you need diffusion in a space, you need ceiling clouds, you need blah,
sure.
blah. We let them know of, like, kind of those building blocks, but there's a lot of aesthetic ways to pull those off. And so we're able to show a lot of that with the renderings of kind of how you can use those building blocks into something that fits with your aesthetic goals.
So with Grand Rapids, you said, there are multiple revisions versus Tim's, there are maybe only 2 revisions. What's the average number of times, like, that you guys send out a first pass and then the client comes back and says, like, all right, yeah, we need to change this? Like, how many revisions do you guys tend to do?
Yeah, I'd say we usually have a total batch of, like, around, 8 to 10-ish rendering batches. I usually, when I'm looking back through old project folders, it's usually like around 10 folders of, different batches of renderings.
Sure.
But a lot of those, it kind of depends on what you consider a kind of a new iteration. I'd say as far as, like, full iterations of, like, finding in the design approach, it's usually, like, less than 5, like 3 to 5. But then there's, kind of like we were talking about earlier, of adding lights, maybe saying, what if we used this darker gray fabric instead of that lighter gray one? Or, could we see a few different flooring options? Where some of those might not be, full on different iterations, but they require, a new batch of renderings.
Sure.
And those are just as important as well. That picking the flooring is always a huge one. And we'll talk about it in a minute in our next example. But because there's so many different flooring options you can have, and they can look so drastically different, and they really change the vibe of a room.
Sure. So before moving on to the next one, like, do you remember, are there like 2 or 3 things that you could call out? And I know you've done a bunch of renderings since you did this one, but are there certain aspects from the inspiration shot that you remember, okay, I'm picking out that specific characteristic and I'm translating it into the rendering?
Yeah, it was definitely the wood slat wall was kind of like the big focal point of the room.
Cool.
That was the striking one of how, and the contrast of it with the white walls, with the white in the room. And so that was kind of like the idea was for that to be the focal point of the room, and to make sure that it was an acoustical detail as well, where it's it's wood slats, but it's acoustically they're mounted on acoustically transparent fabric with acoustical materials behind them.
Sure.
And so making sure that it's still an acoustical detail.
Sure. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
And then this is how that room ended up looking.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy. Cool. That one's like the perfect example of, like, taking the rendering to the real one, and it's like you kind of almost do a second take of, like, whoa, that one was the rendering. Like,
yeah. It's it's just such a comfortable room to be in. Like, it just looks so fun to, like, nice to be sitting in and jamming out, especially in all of his videos that he does of his guitar videos.
Yep.
I'm just like, that looks great.
Yes.
Yep. And so then the last one I thought we'd look at would be Josh Dunn's project from Josh Dunn from 21 Pilots. We did his recording studio in Columbus, Ohio, as longtime fans of the channel will be aware of. But his studio was a ton of fun, and kind of the reason that I wanted to talk about his was that it was a cool opportunity for us to collaborate with other people that were other designers that he was working with. And so it was a cool kind of, a lot of times, as you were talking about, of how the renderings play such a big role in the interior design of a space. A lot of the times we end up kind of being the de facto interior designers for the space, where we're making fabric selections and, kind of guiding them on those types of details. On this project, we kind of served in that purpose, but as we were going through the project, we'll start with this slide. We knew that Josh and Debbie, his wife Debbie, they had a sunroom above the space where the studio was going to go in. That they were having one of their friends, Dabs Mila, who are pretty famous muralists. They were designing a mural for their sunroom above the studio.
Right.
And so when Gavin heard that, he said, he gave him the idea of, why don't we just continue that pattern downstairs and use that in the basement? And so then they loved that idea, and we ended up, that ended up being a huge part of the design of how cool the space ended up being.
Sure.
And so it was an interesting one where these are that's the main focal point of the space is just that design. And so that was a lot of what the artists were doing. But, our lighting scheme mattered with it. What we did on the ceiling mattered with it. What was happening on the flooring mattered with it. Yeah. And so it was interesting of going through the iterations of the design, of seeing how their mural played with our design and vice versa. But I'll start at the beginning with this one. So for his space, he had it was going to be a control room, a live room for his drums, and then a small isolation booth for vocals. But he had this really strong vision of the control room being this sleek, modern, kind of like angular panels, LED lighting going on. Yeah. Kind of like this, I think he called it like a spaceship kind of vibe almost. Okay. Like he really wanted it to have like this modern LED lighting look. But then he wanted the live room to be this fun kind of zany, like mad scientist lab almost, like kind of like just like a fun playground for him to play with. There was at one point when we were toying with the idea of having a climbing wall in the live room if there was a big enough space. Sure. But where he wanted it to be fun. He wanted to have like this sense of fun and just cool vibes, Cool. And so we threw around a lot of different ideas about how to do that. Like I said, the climbing wall was the one that I was the most excited about. I'm a climber. And so that ever since we threw that idea around, that's been one of my goals, is to have a studio with a climbing wall in it.
There you go.
But like I said, what we ended up doing was Gavin had the idea to have Dabs Mila create a mural for the downstairs. Right. And then we would have the image for that mural printed on acoustically transparent fabric and then mount acoustical treatment on on top of that. And so it made for a really fun rendering process as we went through that. And so this was our initial rendering for the control room. Yeah. And this one didn't end up changing a ton. We changed a couple of small things here and there with it. But this was the main kind of the vibe of the room, where it was like these angular side walls. He really wanted the color in the room to come from the lighting. And so he wanted like neutral gray, whites, and black colors. And then he wanted the lighting to be very customizable. Okay. But so this one didn't change a ton. And so we showed like some customized lighting. This is at the time the album that they were doing was pink and teal color schemes. So we kind of included that in all of our renderings. So this space didn't end up changing a ton. And then this was the initial rendering that we did for the live room, where we took one of their existing murals that we had, and we said like, it'd be cool to do a vibe like this, kind of like greenery and foliage, real colorful. Yeah. And we just threw it on there. And then Dabs Mila took a look at this and then kind of created their mural accordingly. Cool. And it was cool where throughout the process they were designing it, they were going through their own iterations of what the mural would look like. And then Josh and Debbie were giving their feedback on it. We would give our feedback on it, and it would kind of go from there. Yeah. But then this was the next, like kind of like the next revision of renderings. Like I said, the control room stayed mostly the same. We added some, equipment and things that they were going to have. I think we changed up some of the angles for the walls a little bit, but it mostly stayed the same. And then this is us showing a few different flooring options. Yeah. Like I said, where you can really see how the room changes between kind of like a blonde light wood flooring to a darker one. Like it really changes the vibe of the room and how much, how bright it feels in there, especially with, the darker woods. It's pretty crazy how different of a room this feels like versus that. And acoustically, it's kind of a moot point. It doesn't matter a ton. Right. But aesthetically, it's such a difference. But so we just showed him a lot of different options for what he could potentially do. Nice. This was an earlier iteration for the design. I really like this look. I really like this spider. I always thought that this spider down here was really, really cool. Yeah. So then this was just one kind of iteration that they were going through. And eventually it became this, which is really similar to what it was to what it is now, but it felt a little bit dark, where there was kind of a lot of black in the space. And then this is kind of what it ended up looking like. Yeah. And where this was the final.
They took the spider out.
A spider, although they replaced it with a snake, which is still cool.
Yeah. I love that though. That's and that's definitely one of the not sure what the word is, but definitely the most like vibrant, I guess, like studio that we've probably done, where when I'm going through and showing people on calls like different examples of the renderings, like when they see Josh's and they realize like what you can really do aesthetically, they're like, whoa, that's amazing. But probably not gonna put, you know, a full mural or something like in their space. But I just love the vibrance of his space.
Yeah, and it gives it, and it really helps coordinate all the different disciplines of what's going on, of like what we have going on, of even with like with Dabs Mila creating the art and creating the pieces, but then even like with the contractors of being aware of what the room's going to look like, having those renderings to kind of serve as that keystone. Really helps them a lot. And so like, and understanding like, you know, the importance of tucking fabric, of setting the channels up right so that the mural seams interact well, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different corners where the fabric needs to be tucked. And so that took a lot of coordinating of making sure that the fabric could be stretched and pulled taut without the image getting distorted.
Right.
And so, just so many different, you know, disciplines coming together and making sure that it all works well together, and it came out really, really cool.
Yeah, and that's one that we've done like a full studio tour that lives on the YouTube channel. So like, if anyone wants to check that out, like we've got that there, because it's crazy how similar the room is to the rendering. I mean, it's pretty dead on.
And this is what the room ended up looking like. Where very bright.
Yeah.
So cool. His custom drum set's so awesome.
Yes. Yeah, that's SJC made that, and that's insane. One of the coolest drum sets I've probably ever seen.
So sweet.
Awesome. So like of the rendering, so I know like obviously you showed like 3 pretty different styles, but do you have like a favorite rendering that you've done?
That's a good question. The Josh Dunn one is really cool because we added so many of his interior features.
Yep.
Where you can see like this plant, his, you know, gumball machine, the red keyboard, the red little storage cabinet thing. You know, we added a lot. We ended up adding a lot of those.
Yeah.
And so this one's really cool where it feels like it's the most comprehensive and similar to what down to the last detail of what we ended up putting in there. This one's definitely really special. Grand Rapids First is so cool.
Yeah.
I love rendering big spaces too. Like they look so grand, especially in renderings. Like they look so cool. And so like that live room that we did with Grand Rapids, I'm so excited for it to get built.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that wraps up this episode of the S.O.U.N.D Project. Go ahead and comment below if you were to design your own studio. What would you use for your inspiration photos? So go ahead and comment that below. And thank you for being a part of the S.O.U.N D Project.